The morning started like any other Tuesday for the Henderson family. Sarah was rushing around the kitchen, packing lunch boxes for her twin children, Emma and Jake, while her husband Michael grabbed his coffee and checked his phone for work messages. The twins, both 15 years old, were typical teenagers who shared everything except their personalities. Emma was the responsible one, always looking out for others, while Jake was the adventurous spirit who loved taking risks. Their golden retriever, Max, sat by the door wagging his tail, knowing it was almost time for his morning walk. Max had been with the family for 8 years, ever since the twins were 7. He was more than just a pet. He was their protector, their companion, and sometimes their best friend when teenage life got complicated. Michael worked as a construction supervisor at a new housing development, about 20 minutes from their suburban home. The job was demanding, but it paid well enough for Sarah to work part-time at the local library while still being available for the kids. Life was comfortable, predictable, and safe. As Michael kissed Sarah goodbye and ruffled the twins' hair, he promised to be home by 6 for dinner. Jake was planning to practice basketball shots in the driveway after school, while Emma had volunteered to walk Max since Sarah had a late shift at the library. These small everyday moments felt ordinary then, but they would soon become precious memories. The construction site where Michael worked was buzzing with activity. The crew was working on the foundation of what would become a luxury home for a wealthy family. Michael had been in construction for over 20 years, and safety was always his top priority. He made sure his workers wore their hard hats, followed proper procedures, and never took shortcuts that could put anyone in danger. Around 10 in the morning, Michael was inspecting some newly poured concrete when he noticed something wrong with one of the support beams. He called over his assistant foreman, Tony, to take a look. They both agreed that the beam needed to be adjusted before they could continue with the next phase of construction. Michael climbed up on the scaffolding to get a better view of the problem. He had done this thousands of times before, but construction sites are unpredictable places where accidents can happen in split seconds. As he reached for his measuring tape, a gust of wind caught a loose tarp nearby, creating a distraction just as his foot slipped on a wet board. The fall seemed to happen in slow motion. Michael tumbled 15 feet, his hard hat flying off as he hit the ground with a sickening thud. The construction site fell silent except for the sound of Tony shouting for help and calling 911. Blood trickled from Michael's head, and he lay motionless on the muddy ground. The paramedics arrived within minutes, but those minutes felt like hours to Tony and the other workers who watched helplessly. Michael was unconscious, his breathing shallow but steady. The paramedics carefully placed him on a stretcher and rushed him to St. Mary's Hospital, the closest trauma center. At the hospital, doctors immediately began running tests. Michael had suffered a severe concussion and some internal injuries from the impact. The medical team worked quickly to stabilize him, but he remained unconscious. The doctors explained to Sarah, who had rushed to the hospital after receiving Tony's call, that Michael was in a coma and they wouldn't know the full extent of his injuries until he woke up. Sarah sat by Michael's bedside, holding his hand and talking to him even though he couldn't respond. The doctor said that sometimes coma patients could hear what was happening around them, so she told him about her day, about the twins, about Max waiting for him at home. Hours passed, but Michael remained motionless except for the steady rise and fall of his chest. The twins were still at school when the accident happened. Sarah had asked her neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, to meet them at the bus stop and explain what had occurred. She wanted to tell them herself, but she couldn't bear to leave Michael's side. Emma and Jake rushed to the hospital as soon as they heard, their faces pale with worry. The family spent the evening in the hospital waiting room, taking turns sitting with Michael. The doctor said there was nothing more they could do except wait and hope that he would wake up soon. Brain injuries were unpredictable, they explained. Some people woke up quickly, while others took days or even weeks to regain consciousness. As night fell, Sarah finally agreed to go home with the twins to get some rest. She promised Michael she would be back first thing in the morning. The ride home was quiet, each family member lost in their own thoughts about what the future might hold. Max greeted them at the door, sensing that something was wrong when Michael didn't come home with them. That night, none of them slept well. Sarah tossed and turned, replaying the day's events in her mind. Emma lay awake staring at the ceiling, worried about her father and trying to be strong for her mother. Jake, usually the tough one, quietly cried into his pillow, scared of losing the man who had taught him how to throw a baseball and ride a bike. Max seemed to understand that the family was in distress. Instead of sleeping in his usual spot in the living room, he positioned himself in the hallway where he could watch over everyone. Dogs have an incredible ability to sense when their humans are hurting, and Max was no exception. He would play a crucial role in the days to come, though no one knew it yet. The next morning brought no change in Michael's condition. Sarah arrived at the hospital before dawn, hoping to see some sign of improvement, but her husband remained unconscious. The doctors ran more tests and assured her that his vital signs were stable, but they couldn't predict when he might wake up. The waiting was the hardest part. Emma and Jake went to school, but neither could concentrate on their classes. Their friends and teachers offered support and kind words, but nothing could ease the knot of worry in their stomachs. Emma found herself checking her phone constantly, hoping for good news from her mother. Jake got into trouble for not paying attention during math class, something that had never happened before. During lunch break, Emma called her mother from the school counselor's office. Sarah's voice sounded tired and strained as she explained that there was still no change. The doctors were optimistic, she said, but they needed to be patient. Emma felt helpless being at school while her father lay unconscious in a hospital bed. After school, both twins wanted to go straight to the hospital, but Sarah insisted they come home first to let Max out and grab some dinner. The family routine had been completely disrupted and everyone was struggling to adjust. Simple things like walking the dog and eating meals had become complicated when your world was turned upside down. Max greeted the twins with his usual enthusiasm, but Emma noticed he seemed different. He kept looking toward the front door as if expecting Michael to walk through at any moment. Dogs don't understand hospitals or accidents, but they definitely understand when someone important is missing from their pack. Emma took responsibility for Max's care, knowing her mother had enough to worry about. She filled his food and water bowls and took him for a walk around the neighborhood. Max walked differently than usual, stopping frequently to sniff the air and look around. It was as if he was searching for something or someone. That evening at the hospital, Sarah sat beside Michael's bed reading him articles from the local newspaper, hoping the familiar sound of her voice might help him wake up. Emma held his other hand and told him about her day at school, about the test she had in biology tomorrow, about how Max was waiting for him at home. Jake stood at the foot of the bed, uncomfortable with the machines and tubes but refusing to leave. The night shift nurse, a kind woman named Patricia who had been working at the hospital for 15 years, stopped by to check on Michael. She had seen many families go through similar situations, and she could tell that the Hendersons were close-knit and loving. She assured Sarah that Michael was getting the best care possible and that she shouldn't lose hope. Around 9 o'clock, visiting hours ended, and the family reluctantly prepared to leave. Sarah kissed Michael's forehead and whispered that she would be back in the morning. Emma squeezed his hand one more time and Jake touched his father's shoulder, something he was too embarrassed to do when others were watching. The drive home was quiet again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. They were all exhausted, emotionally drained from a day of worry and uncertainty. When they walked into the house, Max immediately ran to the front door and then back to them, his tail wagging but his eyes looking confused and sad. Sarah realized that Max didn't understand where Michael was or when he was coming back. She knelt down and petted him gently, trying to explain in the soft voice people use with children and animals. Of course, Max couldn't understand her words, but he seemed to sense her sadness and pressed his warm body against her legs. That night, Max did something unusual. Instead of staying in his bed in the living room, he scratched at Emma's bedroom door until she let him in. He curled up on the floor beside her bed, positioning himself where he could see both her and the hallway. Emma found his presence comforting, and for the first time since the accident, she managed to fall into a deep sleep. The second day brought more of the same. Michael remained unconscious, though the doctors said his brain activity looked normal on the scans. Sarah maintained her vigil at his bedside, talking to him constantly and playing his favorite music on her phone. She had read somewhere that familiar sounds and voices could help coma patients wake up. Emma and Jake struggled through another day at school, their minds focused on their father rather than their studies. Their friends tried to be supportive, but teenagers often don't know what to say in difficult situations. Some avoided them entirely, unsure how to act around people dealing with a family crisis. When the twins came home, they found Max waiting by the front window, a habit he had developed since Michael's accident. It was as if he was watching for the family car, hoping to see his favorite human return home. Emma's heart ached seeing the loyal dog's confusion and devotion. That afternoon, Emma decided to take Max to the park where Michael usually threw tennis balls for him on weekends. She thought a change of scenery might help both of them feel better. Max ran around the park, but he kept returning to Emma's side, looking behind her as if expecting someone else to appear. Other dog owners at the park noticed Max's behavior and struck up conversations with Emma. When she explained what had happened to her father, several people shared their own stories of family emergencies and how their pets had reacted. One elderly man told her that dogs often sense things that humans can't, and that Max's unusual behavior might mean something important. Emma didn't think much of the comment at the time, but it would prove to be prophetic. That night, Max again insisted on sleeping in Emma's room, and she was beginning to understand that the dog was trying to protect and comfort the family in the only way he knew how. His instincts were telling him that his pack was in distress and needed his help. By the third day, the hospital routine had become painfully familiar. Sarah arrived early each morning, spent the day talking to Michael and watching for any sign of consciousness, then reluctantly returned home each evening. The doctors remained cautiously optimistic, but privately, Sarah was beginning to worry that her husband might never wake up. Emma had become the unofficial caretaker of the household. She made sure Jake ate breakfast before school, took care of Max's needs, and tried to keep some sense of normalcy for everyone. At 15, she was handling responsibilities that would challenge many adults, but she did it without complaint, because her family needed her. Jake was struggling more than he let anyone see. At school, he got into an argument with a classmate who made a thoughtless comment about his father. The school counselor called Sarah at the hospital to discuss Jake's behavior, adding another layer of stress to an already overwhelming situation. Max's behavior continued to evolve in strange ways. He had started following Emma everywhere, rarely leaving her side when she was home. At night, he positioned himself at her bedroom door like a guard, alert to every sound in the house. During the day, he would often sit by the front window for hours as if watching for something specific. On Wednesday afternoon, Emma decided to take Max for a longer walk than usual. She needed time to think and process everything that had happened. The responsibility she felt for holding her family together was enormous, and sometimes she just wanted to be a normal teenager whose biggest worry was a history test. They walked through the neighborhood and eventually found themselves at the small creek that ran behind their housing development. It was a peaceful spot where Michael had often taken the family for picnics when the twins were younger. Emma sat on a fallen log while Max explored the area, sniffing at interesting scents and chasing a butterfly. As she sat there thinking about her father, Emma noticed that Max had stopped his usual exploring and was standing perfectly still. His head tilted as if he was listening to something she couldn't hear. His ears were perked up and his tail was rigid with attention. Dogs have much better hearing than humans, so Emma assumed he had detected some wildlife nearby. But then Max did something that surprised her. He walked directly to Emma and gently grabbed her jacket sleeve with his teeth, tugging softly but persistently. He had never done anything like this before. Max was a well-trained dog who didn't typically pull on clothing or try to lead people anywhere. Emma stood up, thinking maybe Max needed to go home, but instead of heading toward the house, he pulled her in the direction of the creek. His behavior was so unusual that Emma decided to follow him, curious about what had captured his attention so completely. Max led her along the creek bank for about 50 yards, stopping frequently to look back and make sure she was following. His body language was intense and focused, unlike his usual playful demeanor during walks. When they reached a bend in the creek where the water formed a small pool, Max sat down and looked directly at Emma, then back at the water. At first, Emma didn't see anything unusual. The creek was shallow and clear, flowing gently over smooth stones. But as she looked more carefully, she noticed something glinting in the water near the far bank. It looked like metal, partially buried under some fallen leaves and debris. Emma waded into the shallow water, her shoes getting soaked, and carefully moved the leaves aside. What she found made her gasp with surprise and confusion. It was her father's wallet, unmistakably his because of the distinctive leather and the small dent in one corner where Jake had accidentally dropped a hammer on it months earlier. The wallet was waterlogged and muddy, but when Emma opened it, everything was still inside. Michael's driver's license, credit cards, family photos, and even some cash. She couldn't understand how it had gotten there. Her father had been wearing work clothes when he fell at the construction site, and the creek was miles away from where he worked. Emma's mind raced with questions, but she knew she needed to get the wallet to her mother immediately. Maybe it would provide some clue about what had happened. Or maybe the doctors needed to know about it for some medical reason she couldn't understand. She carefully wrapped the wallet in her jacket to protect it from further damage. Max seemed satisfied with their discovery and trotted alongside Emma as they hurried home. His earlier intensity had been replaced by what almost looked like relief, as if he had accomplished something important. Emma kept looking down at him, wondering how he had known to bring her to that exact spot. When they arrived home, Emma immediately called her mother at the hospital. Sarah's reaction was a mixture of confusion and concern. She couldn't explain how Michael's wallet had ended up in the creek, and she worried that there might be parts of the accident that nobody understood yet. Sarah asked Emma to bring the wallet to the hospital right away. She wanted to show it to the doctors and see if they had any explanation. Emma grabbed Jake from his room where he had been pretending to do homework, and they drove to the hospital together, Max insisting on coming along. At the hospital, Sarah examined the wallet carefully while the twins watched. Everything seemed normal except for one thing that made her frown with worry. Behind Michael's driver's license, tucked into a small pocket she rarely looked at, was a business card for a neurologist in the next city over. Sarah had never seen it before, and Michael had never mentioned visiting any specialists. The business card was dry despite the wallet being underwater, protected by the plastic sleeve of the license. The neurologist's name was Dr. Elizabeth Chen, and the card looked relatively new. Sarah wondered if Michael had been experiencing health problems he hadn't told her about, problems that might have contributed to his fall. Emma noticed her mother's concerned expression and asked what was wrong. Sarah showed them the business card, explaining that she had no idea why Michael would have had it. The twins looked at each other with worry, realizing that their father might have been dealing with something serious that he had kept from the family. That evening, Sarah called Dr. Chen's office and left a message explaining the situation. She needed to know if Michael had been her patient and what kind of treatment he might have been receiving. The mystery of the wallet and the business card added a new layer of complexity to an already difficult situation, but Emma couldn't shake the feeling that Max had led her to find it for a very important reason. Dr. Elizabeth Chen returned Sarah's call the next morning while she was sitting beside Michael's hospital bed. The neurologist's voice was professional but compassionate as she explained that Michael had indeed been her patient. He had come to see her 3 weeks earlier, referred by his family doctor after experiencing some troubling symptoms. Sarah's heart sank as Dr. Chen described Michael's condition. He had been having brief episodes of dizziness and disorientation that he had initially attributed to working long hours in the heat. However, when the symptoms persisted, his family doctor had ordered some tests and then referred him to Dr. Chen for further evaluation. The neurologist explained that Michael had been diagnosed with a rare but treatable condition that affected his inner ear and balance. It wasn't life-threatening, but it could cause sudden dizzy spells that might lead to falls or accidents. Michael had been prescribed medication and was scheduled for a follow-up appointment the week after his accident. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and frustration as she listened. Relief because the condition was treatable, but frustration because Michael hadn't told her about it. Dr. Chen seemed to understand her feelings and gently explained that many patients initially keep medical concerns to themselves, especially when they don't want to worry their families. More importantly, Dr. Chen's information gave the hospital doctors valuable insight into Michael's condition. They realized that his fall might not have been a simple accident, but rather the result of a medical episode. This knowledge helped them adjust his treatment plan and gave them a better understanding of what they were dealing with. Meanwhile, Emma was at school trying to concentrate on her classes, but her mind kept returning to Max's strange behavior and how he had somehow known to lead her to her father's wallet. She had always heard that dogs had special instincts, but what Max had done seemed almost supernatural. During lunch, Emma called home to check on Max, something she had started doing since the accident. Mrs. Peterson, their neighbor who had been helping with the dog, answered the phone. She sounded concerned as she explained that Max was acting very strangely. According to Mrs. Peterson, Max had been pacing around the house all morning, whining and scratching at doors. He wouldn't eat his breakfast, and he kept running to the front door as if he wanted to go somewhere specific. His agitation was unlike anything she had seen before. Emma asked Mrs. Peterson to put Max on a leash and bring him to the school so she could take him home early. Something about the dog's behavior worried her, and she had learned to trust Max's instincts after yesterday's discovery at the creek. When Mrs. Peterson arrived at the school with Max, Emma could immediately see that something was different about him. His eyes were alert and focused, and he seemed to be barely containing some kind of urgent energy. As soon as he saw Emma, he pulled toward her car, clearly wanting to go somewhere. Emma made a quick decision that would prove to be crucial. Instead of going home, she decided to take Max to the hospital. She couldn't explain why, but something told her that the dog needed to be with Michael. Maybe Max could sense something that the humans couldn't detect. At the hospital, Emma had to convince the staff to let Max visit Michael's room. Normally, only trained therapy dogs were allowed in patient areas, but Nurse Patricia remembered Emma and her family from the past few days. She could see how distressed Emma was, and she decided to make an exception for a brief visit. When they reached Michael's room, Max's behavior immediately became even more intense. He pulled Emma directly to his father's bedside and then did something that amazed everyone present. The dog very gently placed his front paws on the bed and laid his head near Michael's hand. Whining softly, Sarah looked up from her chair beside the bed, surprised to see Emma and Max. She started to ask why they weren't at school, but then she noticed something that made her catch her breath. Michael's fingers were moving slightly, something she hadn't seen since the accident. Nurse Patricia quickly checked Michael's vital signs and noticed that his heart rate had increased, and his brain activity on the monitor was more active than it had been in days. She immediately called for the doctor while Max remained perfectly still beside the bed, as if he was afraid to disturb whatever was happening. Dr. Rodriguez, the attending physician, arrived within minutes and began examining Michael. He was amazed to see the changes in the patient's condition. Michael's eyes were moving beneath his closed lids and his breathing pattern had changed. These were positive signs that suggested he might be closer to waking up. As the medical team worked, Max never moved from his position beside the bed. His presence seemed to have a calming effect on everyone in the room, including Michael. The dog's breathing had synchronized with Michael's, and his warm body pressed gently against the bedside seemed to provide some kind of comfort. Emma watched in amazement as her father's condition appeared to improve simply from Max's presence. She had read about therapy animals helping patients, but this seemed different. Max wasn't a trained therapy dog. He was just a family pet who loved Michael and somehow knew he was needed. Dr. Rodriguez explained that sometimes familiar scents, sounds, or touches could help stimulate coma patients toward consciousness. Max's presence provided all three: his familiar smell, the sound of his gentle whining, and the warmth of his body against the bed. Over the next hour, Michael's responses became more pronounced. His fingers moved more frequently, and several times he seemed to turn his head slightly toward the sound of Max's voice. The medical team was cautiously optimistic, but they warned the family not to get their hopes up too much. Sarah called Jake at school and asked him to come to the hospital immediately. She also called her mother and Michael's parents, telling them that there had been positive changes and they should come as soon as possible. For the first time since the accident, she felt genuinely hopeful. As the afternoon wore on, Max remained steadfastly beside the bed. Nurses and doctors came and went, but the dog never moved unless someone specifically asked him to step aside. His devotion was so touching that even the hospital staff, who were used to difficult situations, found themselves moved by the scene. Around 4 o'clock, something extraordinary happened. Michael's eyes fluttered open for just a few seconds. He didn't seem fully conscious, but his gaze appeared to focus briefly on Max before closing again. It was the first time he had opened his eyes since the accident, and everyone in the room felt a surge of excitement and hope. The medical team increased their monitoring and began preparing for the possibility that Michael might regain full consciousness soon. They explained to the family that waking up from a coma was often a gradual process, with patients drifting in and out of consciousness before fully awakening. The fifth day brought a mixture of hope and anxiety. Michael continued to show signs of improvement, opening his eyes for longer periods and responding to voices, but he hadn't spoken or shown full awareness yet. The doctors were encouraged by his progress, but they reminded the family that recovery from a serious brain injury could take time. Max had become a fixture in the hospital room. The staff had given up trying to enforce the no pets policy after seeing how positively Michael responded to the dog's presence. Max seemed to understand that he had an important job to do, rarely leaving his post beside the bed except when absolutely necessary. Emma had missed 2 days of school, but her teachers were understanding about the circumstances. Jake was struggling more with the situation, feeling helpless and scared about his father's condition. He found it difficult to sit quietly in the hospital room for long periods, so he often paced the hallways or sat in the waiting area. That morning, Dr. Rodriguez brought encouraging news. Michael's latest brain scans showed significant improvement, and his vital signs were stronger than they had been since the accident. The neurologist, Dr. Chen, had also consulted on the case and adjusted his medications to better address the balance disorder that had likely caused his fall. Around noon, something remarkable happened. Michael opened his eyes and kept them open, looking around the room with a confused but alert expression. His gaze landed on Max, who was lying quietly beside the bed, and a slight smile crossed his face. Sarah immediately moved to his side, taking his hand in hers. "Michael, can you hear me?" she asked softly, her voice trembling with emotion. Michael's mouth moved, but no sound came out at first. He seemed to be trying to speak but couldn't quite manage it. Max lifted his head and made a soft whining sound, as if encouraging his human to try again. Finally, Michael managed to whisper one word, "Max." His voice was hoarse and barely audible, but it was the most beautiful sound his family had heard in days. The medical team was called immediately, and they began a series of tests to assess Michael's cognitive function. He was able to respond to simple questions by nodding or shaking his head, though speaking seemed to require enormous effort. Over the next few hours, Michael's awareness continued to improve. He recognized Sarah and the twins, though he seemed confused about where he was and what had happened to him. The doctors explained that some memory loss and confusion were normal after a serious head injury. When Dr. Rodriguez asked Michael if he remembered anything about the accident, Michael looked puzzled and shook his head. However, when he saw Max beside his bed, his eyes filled with tears of gratitude and love. It was clear that even in his confused state, he understood that his faithful companion had played a role in his recovery. Emma told her father about how Max had led her to find his wallet at the creek, and how the business card inside had helped the doctors understand his condition better. Michael looked amazed, though he couldn't fully process all the information yet. The discovery of Dr. Chen's business card had been crucial in Michael's treatment. The hospital doctors had been able to coordinate with the neurologist to ensure that his balance disorder was properly managed during his recovery. Without this information, his treatment might have been less effective. As evening approached, Michael was able to stay awake for longer periods and speak in short sentences. His first concern was for his family and whether they had been taking care of themselves. Sarah assured him that Emma had been incredibly responsible, taking care of Max and helping with household duties. Jake finally found the courage to approach his father's bedside and tell him how scared he had been. Michael reached out with a trembling hand to touch his son's face, whispering that he was sorry for worrying everyone. The reunion was emotional for the entire family, but Max seemed to understand that his most important work was done. The dog finally relaxed, stretching out on the floor beside the bed with a satisfied sigh. He had somehow known that his human needed him, and he had refused to give up. That night, for the first time since the accident, Michael was able to eat some solid food and carry on simple conversations with his family. The doctors were amazed by his rapid improvement once he regained consciousness, and they attributed much of it to the strong support system he had, both human and canine. Nurse Patricia, who had worked with many families during difficult times, told Sarah that she had never seen anything quite like Max's devotion and seeming ability to know exactly what was needed. She had worked with therapy dogs before, but Max's instinctive behavior had been extraordinary. The local news station heard about the story and wanted to do a feature about Max's role in Michael's recovery. The family politely declined, preferring to keep their experience private. But they were amazed by how many people had been touched by the story of a loyal dog who refused to give up on his human. Dr. Chen visited Michael the next day to discuss his ongoing treatment for the balance disorder. She was pleased to see how well he was recovering and assured him that with proper medication and some lifestyle adjustments, he should be able to return to work within a few weeks. Michael asked Dr. Chen why he had kept his condition secret from his family. She explained that many patients initially hope their symptoms will resolve on their own and don't want to cause unnecessary worry. However, she emphasized the importance of family support in managing any medical condition. Sarah wasn't angry about Michael's secrecy, but she made him promise to be more open about any health concerns in the future. The accident had taught them all how precious life was and how important it was to face challenges together as a family. As Michael's recovery progressed, Max gradually returned to his normal routine, though he seemed more attentive to his human than ever before. The bond between them had always been strong, but the events of the past week had deepened it in ways that words couldn't express. 3 weeks after the accident, Michael was finally ready to come home from the hospital. His recovery had been remarkable, though he still experienced some fatigue and occasional dizziness from his head injury. The balance disorder was well controlled with medication, and Dr. Chen was optimistic about his long-term prognosis. The day of his discharge was filled with mixed emotions. The hospital staff had grown fond of the Henderson family, and especially of Max, who had become something of a celebrity among the nurses. Several staff members stopped by to say goodbye and to pet Max one last time. Nurse Patricia presented Max with a special collar. Tag that red hero dog, though Max seemed more interested in the treats she had brought him. She told the family that in her 15 years of nursing, she had never seen anything quite like the bond between Michael and his dog, or the way Max had seemed to know exactly what his human needed. The ride home was quiet, with Michael sitting in the passenger seat looking out at familiar neighborhoods he hadn't seen in weeks. Max sat in the back seat between the twins, his head resting on Emma's lap, finally relaxed now that his family was together again. When they arrived home, Michael was overwhelmed by the sight of his house and yard. Everything looked the same, but he felt profoundly changed by his experience. The accident had given him a new appreciation for his family, his health, and the simple pleasures of daily life. Max immediately led Michael on a tour of the house and yard, as if he was showing him that everything was safe and secure. The dog seemed proud to have his human back in his territory, and Michael was touched by Max's obvious joy and relief. Over the next few days, the family settled into a new routine. Michael was on medical leave from work for another month, which gave him time to fully recover and to spend precious hours with his family. He found that he tired easily and still had some memory gaps from the accident, but he was grateful to be alive and surrounded by people who loved him. Emma had grown up significantly during the crisis. She had handled responsibilities beyond her years and had shown incredible maturity in caring for Max and supporting her family. Her parents recognized her strength and made sure to acknowledge how much her help had meant to everyone. Jake, too, had been changed by the experience. The fear of losing his father had made him realize how much he loved and needed his family. He became less focused on typical teenage concerns and more interested in spending time with the people who mattered most to him. The story of Max's role in Michael's recovery spread throughout their neighborhood and beyond. People would stop Sarah at the grocery store or approach the twins at school to ask about the amazing dog who had somehow known to help his human. The family was always polite but preferred to keep the details private. One evening, about a month after Michael came home, Dr. Chen called to check on his progress. During their conversation, she mentioned something that gave the family chills. She explained that patients with Michael's balance disorder sometimes experienced what she called pre-episode awareness, a subconscious sense that they were about to have a dizzy spell. Dr. Chen theorized that Michael might have felt such an episode, coming on while at work and somehow dropped his wallet during his confusion, possibly while trying to get to his car or call for help. The wallet could have been picked up by someone who later discarded it near the creek, or Michael himself might have wandered there during a disoriented state before the accident. While the mystery of how the wallet ended up at the creek was never fully solved, the family believed that Max had somehow sensed its importance and led Emma to find it at exactly the right time. The business card inside had been crucial to Michael's proper treatment, and without it, his recovery might have been much more difficult. Michael returned to work part-time after 2 months, with his doctor's approval and some modifications to his duties. His employer had installed additional safety equipment and assigned him tasks that kept him closer to ground level. The construction crew welcomed him back with genuine warmth, and Tony, his assistant foreman, admitted he had been checking on Max's well-being through mutual friends while Michael was in the hospital. The experience had taught Michael valuable lessons about communication and family relationships. He made a promise to Sarah and the twins that he would never again hide health concerns from them, no matter how minor they seemed. The family had grown closer through the crisis, and they made a conscious effort to spend more quality time together. Max returned to his normal routine, but with some notable changes. He became even more protective of Michael, often positioning himself nearby when his human was working in the yard or doing physical activities. The dog seemed to have developed an early warning system, becoming alert and attentive whenever Michael showed any signs of fatigue or dizziness. 6 months after the accident, the family decided to volunteer at the local hospital's pet therapy program. While Max wasn't formally trained as a therapy dog, his natural instincts and gentle temperament made him perfect for visiting patients who needed comfort and companionship. The hospital staff remembered him fondly and were thrilled to have him return in an official capacity. Emma continued to excel in school and eventually decided she wanted to study veterinary medicine. Inspired by Max's incredible intuition and the bond she had witnessed between animals and humans during her father's recovery, her experience caring for Max during the crisis had shown her how much she enjoyed helping animals and their families. Jake developed a new interest in emergency medicine and first aid, partly motivated by his feelings of helplessness during his father's accident. He joined the school's volunteer emergency response team and eventually became certified in CPR and basic first aid. The family was proud of how both twins had channeled their experience into positive goals. On the 1-year anniversary of the accident, the family returned to the creek where Max had led Emma to find Michael's wallet. They brought a picnic lunch and spent the afternoon reflecting on how much their lives had changed. Michael was healthy and back to full-time work, his balance disorder well managed with medication and lifestyle adjustments. Max, now 9 years old, was still energetic and devoted, though he showed his age in small ways. He moved a little slower on their walks and preferred napping in sunny spots rather than chasing tennis balls for hours. But his eyes still held the same intelligence and love that had guided him to help his family during their darkest time. As they sat by the creek that day, Michael finally spoke about something he had never shared with anyone. He told his family that during his coma, he had experienced vivid dreams about Max calling to him, urging him to wake up and come home. While he couldn't be certain whether the dreams were real or products of his injured brain, he felt convinced that Max's presence and love had helped pull him back to consciousness. The family doctor had told them that Michael's recovery was remarkably complete, with no lasting effects from his head injury. His balance disorder remained manageable, and he had learned to recognize the early warning signs of potential episodes. Most importantly, he had learned to trust his family with his vulnerabilities and to accept help when he needed it. The story of Michael's accident and recovery, and Max's extraordinary role in both, became a treasured family legend that was shared with friends and relatives. While they never sought publicity or recognition, the Hendersons often spoke about the experience to other families dealing with medical crises, offering hope and demonstrating the healing power of love, loyalty, and never giving up. Max lived to be 13 years old, spending his final years surrounded by the family who adored him. When he eventually passed away peacefully in his sleep, the family buried him in their backyard with a headstone that read, "Max Henderson, hero, protector, best friend." His legacy lived on in the lives he had touched and the family he had helped save through his unwavering devotion and mysterious canine wisdom. The bond between humans and animals remains one of life's most profound mysteries. Max's story serves as a reminder that love transcends species, and that sometimes the most ordinary family pets possess extraordinary abilities to heal, comfort, and guide us through our darkest moments. In a world that often seems cold and unpredictable, stories like Max's remind us that loyalty, intuition, and unconditional love can work miracles that science cannot fully explain, but hearts understand completely.